welcome to episode 12 of Book Read. Today we are going to hear from the amazing author Nicholas Dobson again with regards to his book Descent into Darkness, which is his take on the Macbeth play by the legendary William Shakespeare. Obviously, if you want to know how Nicholas became an author, you can check out episode 10 where he explains how he became an author and also talks about his book The Regal Throne. Definitely, if you haven't seen that, you definitely need to check this out. But I think without any further ado, let's go and meet today's featured author. Mate, you're becoming a bit of a regular now. I love it. Welcome again to Book Read. This is episode 12 of Book Read. Nicholas Dobson, welcome again. It's lovely to see you again. I'm very excited you're back on the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I thank you so much for inviting me back to talk about my book on Macbeth. Absolutely.
One of my favourite stories and most feared. Used to give me nightmares when I was a kid, actually, studying Macbeth at school. Yeah, those when shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in...
Yes, I mean, it's an amazing start to the play. The witches, which I'll mention in a few minutes when they start to talk about the book. But it is very, very dramatic, a terrifying study in an evil. How you get a chap who was a national treasure, a national hero, saving the day, suddenly finds that being great isn't quite enough. He wants to be an even greater greatness. He wants to be the top guy. And the guy at the top is a bit of a wimp and he could do the job better. So he needs to be, as they say in the gangster films, dealt with.
Yes. And we'll talk
about Macbeth, yes, a good guy turns bad.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure Lady Macbeth will pop up in your conversation as well.
She does, just a touch. Yes, she gives him a certain impetus.
Absolutely. So today we are discussing your book, Descent into Darkness. Can you tell us a little bit about really why Macbeth, why this book? What kind of made you want to write this book?
Well, I was conscious, and particularly my own children growing up, thought of Shakespeare as a bit boring, and they don't sort of really get it. And that's what it seems most people think of. It's all very wordy, it's a little bit boring, and they don't realise how much it's about everybody who's alive today, as much as 400 and how many years ago when Shakespeare was writing. And it's a particularly compelling story. It's a study about power and its abuse. It's a study of human weakness, how a good man can go to the bad, of how, a bit like in the Garden of Eden, it's not enough being great, you want to be even greater. And what are you going to do to get there? And the dark thoughts that are in people's minds often, which took hold of Macbeth, and he started to form a plan to act upon them. When Shakespeare was writing this play and when this play was appearing, King James was newly on the throne, and he had a real obsession with witches. People believed in witches for real. They were forces of evil, and they were relentlessly persecuted. King James himself had written a learned treatise, learned according to the learning of the day, on witches. So for Shakespeare, King James was the patron of his acting company, the King's Men, as it was called. It was a good idea to please the boss, as it were, and write something about witches. And so the witches appear in the play as real entities, but you can also see the witches as the dark side of Macbeth's own conscience. He does have a conscience, and he had to sort of dull that down in himself with the help of his wife, if he was to do the terrible things he did. But the moral aspects of Macbeth is that it brought neither Macbeth nor his wife, Lady Macbeth, any peace or comfort. They were hoping it would bring, apart from the riches of being the king, thought it would bring them the success and absence of anxiety they were both seeking. But it didn't. It troubled them tremendously. Macbeth ended up having his head on a spike by his arch rival Macduff, and Lady Macbeth killed herself. Her conscience, as I put it in the book, exploded, and she couldn't cope with what she'd done. So it's an interesting psychological study, as often embodied in the proverb, "Be careful what you wish for," because what Macbeth wished for, he didn't bring him a moment's peace or joy.
Ultimately, his damnation at the end of the day.
It was indeed in traditional terms, and he consciously sold his soul to the devil.
Yeah.
In one of the speeches he makes, he says, he became so obsessed, he was prepared to wade in and do the very worst to get what he wanted. But what he wanted was an illusion in the end, because it just slipped through his fingers and led him into perdition.
And still, like you said, it's still so relevant to today. It's still a mistake that so many people make.
It is. You can see it in international statesmen who do appalling things and kill any number of people to bring them the sort of illusion of greatness in their own minds and in the history books, when the reality is they will probably go down as evil tyrants. Who no one will mourn.
I would be very interested if Mr. Shakespeare, if quantum physics does hold what it says it's hold, and past, present and future all operate at the same time. I would really love Shakespeare to come out with a couple of new books to describe what's going on.
Yeah, he'd be a very good columnist today if you could read the newspapers. And now we have Shakespeare on current international conflicts. What do you think, William? And he would tell us. Maybe
something AI can come up with eventually. like the whole take of the world through William Shakespeare's eyes. That would be pretty magical to find out what he would think about the world as it is today. So the book we're talking about today is Descent into Darkness. Would you like to read us some?
I would love to.
I would.
I'll start off with just giving a resume of what the thing's about, and then I'll read an extract from the book, from the end of the book where I sum things up. But that's often a good place to start giving a discussion, because it summarises some of the key themes.
Absolutely. Okay, then I will let you get on.
Right, as I said, I'm just going to give a brief resume of what the story is, and then I shall read an extract from my book Descent into Darkness, from the afterword, the epilogue, about ambition and personal responsibility. So Macbeth, in short, tells the story of a war hero who, after fighting and achieving a valorous victory, becomes the toast of the nation and indeed the national treasure. But on his return to receive due recognition from the king, he's not entirely happy, for he thinks the king's a bit of a wimp, and why should he be bowing and scraping before that milksop excuse for a monarch? It's then that Macbeth, riding with his battle companion Banquo, encounters the witches, who, spotting something dark within Macbeth, set to work with him, on him, and promise him great things. Now, I'll read Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth, because it has such a dramatic opening. The witches are on the stage in deserted place. There's thunder and lightning, and they enter the forces of darkness, 3 forces of darkness. When shall we 3 meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won, that will be before the set of sun. Where's the place? Upon the heath, there to meet with Macbeth. I come, grey Malkin, paddock calls anon. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and the filthy air. So that's Act 1, which starts dramatically, and you get a flavour that all is not going to be well in this play. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. And there is an atmosphere, fog and filthy air, of murk and gloom betokening evil. So I read from my afterword, the epilogue to Descent into Darkness, and say Descent into Darkness charts a war hero's troubled journey into evil after encountering 3 demonic witches who activate darkly vaulting ambition, leading him to an inglorious end as a dead butcher and abhorred tyrant. And faring no better was his murderous mentor and fiend-like queen, Lady Macbeth. For overwhelmed by the enormity of their actions, she, as Shakespeare put it, took off her life by self and violent hands. Shakespeare's genius is to give Macbeth a conscience, which he initially struggles to conquer as we join him on his sombre sojourn into hell. For while Macbeth wades ever deeper into murky darkness and remains troubled by his deeds, he nevertheless steels himself to continue in blood and resigns himself to being the monster he has created in a world where nothing is what it seems, and where fair is foul and foul is fair. So here's now an episode from the epilogue dealing with how Macbeth masters his conscience and makes a personal decision to do the unspeakable, to murder his king, King Duncan, while the king stays at his Macbeth's castle as Macbeth's guest. I call this section Fully Conscious Journey into Darkness by Macbeth. It didn't have to be that way, for before he met the witches, Macbeth was a war hero who'd saved the day. Brave Macbeth, as the sergeant referred to him in Act 1, Scene 2. And after hearing the sergeant's account of Macbeth's unrelenting courage and determination, Macbeth, according to the king, was King Duncan's valiant cousin and a worthy gentleman. When soon afterwards Duncan learned of the Thane of Cawdor's treachery, one of his noblemen's treachery, he'd given state secrets away to the enemy, and consequently pronounced his present death, and in his absence made Macbeth Thane of Cawdor in the treacherous predecessor's place. Duncan remarked that what Cawdor had lost, noble Macbeth has won. So Macbeth began the play in high favour and a royal favourite. What could possibly, you might think, go wrong? Well, this chapter aims to offer some pointers by considering some of the key themes and elements of the drama. It seems that the witches, who Shakespeare called detestable slaves of the devil, according to King James, and probably also to most of Shakespeare's audience, had a plan for Macbeth. For before the play even began, as satanic, tempting emissaries, it seemed that they had recognised something in Macbeth on which the witches could work, and therefore lead him to destruction, thereby helping create a world where fair is foul and foul is fair, a world of evil, within the reign of chaos and old night, as the poet Milton put it. So the witches agreed to meet Macbeth that day, the set of sun before the sunset, and to plant in his mind an enchanting promise of even greater greatness. But the dark side of success can be overweening pride, and in Greek mythology, excessive pride or defiance of the gods led to destruction, as in the old proverb, pride comes before a fall. So when Macbeth saved the day and became an honoured war hero, he quickly seemed to feel that enough wasn't quite enough. So when on his way to Duncan's castle, he encountered the witches with their beguilingly teasing promise that he would first be Thane of Cawdor and then King hereafter. It set his mind into a spin, causing him to become in something of a trance. So he urgently pressed the witches to know more. Say from whence you owe the strange intelligence, this strange notion which had been planting in my head. Why, upon this blasted heath, this wilderness, you stop our way with such prophetic greeting? Speak, I charge you. But even at that early stage, Macbeth was already starting to contemplate murdering his way to regal office. For soon afterwards, he privately reflected that my thought, whose murder yet is but in my head, yet fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise. He can't function because he's thinking of what he has to do, of murder the king if he's going to gain the throne himself, which is what he earnestly desires and what the witches have made him so earnestly wish for. At this stage, however, Macbeth hopes it won't need to come to that, for chance may deliver the crown to him without him needing to bloody his hands. So he says to himself, if chance may make me king, why, chance may crown me without me having to do anything. Nevertheless, the thought of kingship took toxic hold of his mind, for whilst he will put the thought to one side for the moment, he tells himself, come what may, and suggests through his mate Banquo, when they're on their way to greet the king after their day in battle, and he suggests to Banquo they meet privately when they can to discuss the weird encounter with these strange apparitions and what they're going to do about it. But what sets Macbeth more determined than ever on the road to darkness is Duncan's appointment of his son Malcolm as his successor. So chance will certainly not now deliver the throne to Macbeth. If he wants the king to be the king, he's going to have to take the situation in hand himself. His mind therefore moves into the moral shadows as he tells himself, stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. And that's quite early on in the play. But whilst the witches might have sown the sinful seed, it is Macbeth who, despite loud appeals from his conscience, made the active decision himself to go ahead and do the deed. Whilst his wife, with cunningly applied craft, wifely chastising him with the valour of her tongue, and stingingly questioning his manhood, cements his resolution. Had Macbeth's inner determination not existed in the first place, Lady Macbeth could never have prevailed. For Macbeth, in his nature as the fiercest of valorous war heroes, would never have given in to his wife had he not already decided, or half decided, to do what needed to be done, even if he'd not by then fully admitted this to himself. For Lady Macbeth, with the aid of her blood-curdling language, which we'll come on to, simply helped him to do what he was always going to do anyway, and so he does. So as Macbeth sets off to do the deed to kill the king, at the signal of his wife's sounding bell, Macbeth kills his conscience and fear, and strides off to slake his vaulting ambition, as Shakespeare puts it, muttering, "I go, and it is done. The bell rung by my wife invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell." From there it's a downhill journey. As the porter in Act 2, Scene 3 puts it, the primrose way to the everlasting bonfire for Macbeth. In other words, hell. But Lady Macbeth, I now consider, although Macbeth knew what he was doing from the start, he was wanting the ultimate national greatness of being king. Nothing else would do, and his wife wanted it as much as he did. But she knew her husband, brave warrior though he was, could be a bit too compassionate, had too tender a conscience, so she would have to spur him into manning up if King Duncan were to be dealt with, as film mafiosi often indicate, and for that she had to take herself to the devil. So she invokes the evil spirits that serve or accompany malevolent thoughts of death and destruction. "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts," and petitions them with a chilling plea. She begs the malign forces of evil to unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Because women have traditionally been portrayed as more compassionate and sympathetic than men, Lady Macbeth pleads to be unsexed. This is so that instead of kindness, pity and fellow feeling, she's driven by the worst type of cruelty. She details what she seeks so that no flicker of natural sympathy can derail her from her murderous intent. So she says, in Shakespeare's language, "Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious, conscience-stricken visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect doing the murder and it." And now in a darkly disturbing passage, Lady Macbeth pleads for her mother's milk, the emblem of benign nurture of mother to child, to be transformed into bitter venom, and that the darkest smoke from hell will make the dire act contemplated invisible to God and the forces of light. So she says, "Come, thick night, and pour thee in the dunnest, the darkest smoke of hell, that my keen knife sees not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry and urge me, hold, hold." So I'd like to read now from the final part of my book, Descent into Darkness, of the afterword, the epilogue, and I call that Hero to Devil. And I note that the legendary 18th century critic Samuel Johnson remarked that in Macbeth, the play, the danger of ambition is well described. However, the ambition of Shakespeare's Macbeth was not a normal and healthy desire to better himself and his family by reasonable means. Instead, Macbeth allowed himself to trespass way off-piste and into evil. For mere ambition, in the sense of seeking reasonable advancement for oneself or significant others by fair means, isn't in itself culpable or morally suspect. It's only when ambition, in the sense of an unhealthy and obsessive yearning for power and elevation, is allowed to become a malign and morally destructive force, sweeping away all obstacles by any means necessary, including deciding to cause or allow significant harm to others, that ambition turns dangerously toxic, and so it was for Macbeth. For Macbeth's conscience alarm was not so faint that he couldn't hear it. On the contrary, when needed, it flashed red and blared exceedingly loud. As Macbeth had noted in Act 1, Scene 7 of the play, Duncan was under Macbeth's own roof, and he comes in double trust. First, as Macbeth's kinsman, his relation by blood, and his subject. He's subject to, he has the duties of a subject to his king, King Duncan. So these are strong arguments against the deed, and then as his host, who should, against any murderer, shut the door, I shouldn't be actually bearing the knife myself. However, it also seems that Duncan was a virtuous king who has, as a king, borne his royal duties so meekly, has been so clear in his great discharge of office, that his virtue will plead like angels trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. In Shakespeare's time, damnation was serious because it meant spending an eternity in hell for the wicked deeds you'd done. Macbeth had reservations, therefore, and felt queasy about proceeding to kill Duncan, since Duncan had just, in particular, honoured him with an additional honour, the honour of being the Thane of Cawdor. And Macbeth's public reputation was soaring particularly high in the light of, as Shakespeare puts it, golden opinions from all sorts of people. However, Lady Macbeth quickly dispelled such, as she puts it, green and pale, sickly thoughts. For, amongst other things, she taunted him with the prospect of living as a coward in his own esteem, and behaving like the proverbial scaredy cat which wanted to catch the fish, but didn't want to get its feet wet. Then, conscience aside, and despite being a brave war hero, Macbeth found himself afraid of failure and discovery. At this, his wife snorted in contempt. "We fail? Man up," she implied. "Just screw your courage to the sticking place, and we won't fail. For all we need to do is to daub King Duncan's attendants with the murdered king's blood, and the servants will take the blame. Couldn't be easier." This convinced Macbeth, who, casting aside conscience, was greatly impressed at his wife's, as Shakespeare puts it, undaunted mettle, courage. So, although fully aware of the triple wickedness of treacherously killing his guest, his blood relation, and king, Macbeth ended the scene determined to carry out Duncan's murder and vowing to dedicate every particle of his being to do the job. No failure of conscience then, for Macbeth's inner voice had given proper warning loud and clear. It was therefore Macbeth who had failed his own conscience and went on to do the deed and pay the price. By Act 3, Scene 1 of the play, Macbeth was sufficiently steeped in evil to admit to himself that he had sold his soul to the devil. And with this in mind, unless his friend Banquo is made to die, he will have lost his immortal soul purely for the sake of Banquo's successors. For the witches had prophesied that Banquo's Macbeth would be king, but his successors wouldn't be king, but Banquo's successors would be. And this played on Macbeth's mind. He really couldn't rest easy with Banquo still alive. So that thought fortified Macbeth's resolution to proceed with his plan to murder Banquo, his former friend, and to hire hitmen to do the job. By Act 4, Scene 1, the witches realise that they now have Macbeth and his soul firmly in their clutches. For as he approaches, the second witch, recognising a fellow agent of darkness, remarks that something wicked this way comes. Consequently, in that scene, Macbeth's easy prey to further double-meaning promptings from the witches and the apparitions they summon up. So after firstly telling Macbeth to beware Macduff, the apparitions then boast to him with ill-founded high confidence, the second apparition encouraging him to laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. But although Macbeth was pleased that the first apparition that the witches summoned up in warning him to beware the Thane of Fife had correctly identified his fear of Macduff's rival, when he received the fake assurance from the second apparition that none of woman born shall harm Macduff, that seemed to rule out Macduff as a source of danger to him, Macbeth decided he would kill Macduff anyway. This was not only because he thought Macduff had acted discourteously towards him by failing to attend the Macbeth's celebratory banquet, but also to put his own safety beyond doubt. In other words, as he put it, to make assurance doubly sure. But whilst this resolve by Macbeth to hedge his bets on self-protection might be understandable in the circumstances, his rapid decision to surprise Macduff's castle and give to the edge of the sword Macduff's wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line, his successes is not, for this gruesomely depicted in Act 4, Scene 2, seemed almost entirely spiteful, not least since it was the successors of Banquo, and not those of Macduff, that the witches had prophesied would get kings, though himself Macbeth be none. Then adding fuel to Macbeth's existing high and overweening pride, the third apparition indicates that Macbeth will never be conquered until Birnam Wood marches against him to his castle at Dunsinane in Scotland. Macbeth shall never vanquished be, said the apparition, until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. Ludicrously think that can never happen, unless till of course it does. For in Act 5, Scene 5, a messenger tells Macbeth that Birnam Wood is doing just that, for Duncan's son Malcolm's army, bearing camouflage boughs cut from Birnam Wood, is marching quickly to wreak justice upon Macbeth. However, earlier in the act, it seems that Macbeth and his rule is already falling apart, as one of his noblemen indicates in Act 5, Scene 2. Some say Macbeth's mad, all those that lesser hate him, or just call it valiant fury, but for certain he can't buckle his distempered cause, his cause which is sick and losing supporters by the minute. He can't buckle his distempered cause within the belts of rule. It's like Macbeth's cause is a fat tummy which the belt won't keep in. And another nobleman adds, those he commands move only in command, nothing in love. He's basically lost his supporters. They only move out of fear, not out of any love for him. And now does he feel his title hanging loose about him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. So power is slipping away from him by the minute. We see this throughout the Act 5, the final act of the play. An act is a division of the play, and there are usually 5 major divisions in Shakespeare's plays called acts. So throughout Act 5, the final act of Macbeth, Macbeth is often irrationally enraged with his attendants. So, for instance, in Scene 3, when a servant tells him that the English have an army of 10,000 approaching, he greets the news at first by abusing his servant. Go prick thy face, and overrend thy fear, thou lily-livered boy. His face, the servant's face, is pale with fear, and he says, go and prick it so at least there'll be blood over it, so it will make you look less frightened than you actually are. But as the servant exits, Macbeth quickly deflates, telling his armourer that he is sick at heart, and reflects that he has fallen into the steer. He's become like a withered autumn leaf. Bereft of the comforts of advanced years, the comforts that you might expect as an older person who's lived their life well, such as honour, love, obedience, and troops of friends. So by Act 5, Scene 5, when he hears of the death of his wife, who for all her profound moral corruption was an abundant source of supportive strength for her husband, the once robustly vigorous warrior finds life entirely meaningless. For in a famous speech, he says, life is but a walking shadow, and a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying meaning nothing. And to make matters worse for Macbeth, at that moment, when Macbeth is at his lowest ebb, he learns that burning wood is somehow moving towards Dunsinane. But, as he vainly imagined, one final trump card is left to him, for as he ruthlessly slays the brave military novice, young Seward, he boasts that swords he smiles at, and weapons laughs to scorn, brandished by a man somewhat woman-born, for the witch's apparitions told him that he could never be conquered by any man who's born a woman. But what he doesn't realise is the witches were speaking with double meaning, because Macduff was born by caesarean section, so wasn't born in the usual way by woman. And so the witches have hoodwinked Macbeth into believing he was invulnerable. So, as I say in the book, this won't long avail him, for Macduff is immediately hot on his trail. And after blowing open Macbeth's false reassurance by telling Macbeth that Macbeth was from his mother's womb, that Macduff was from his mother's womb, untimely ripped by caesarean section, Macduff wreaks retribution upon Macbeth by killing him and chopping off his head for ignominious display on a spike. At the outset, right at the beginning of the play, in Act 1, Scene 2, but after the witches had, for their dark purposes, agreed that day to meet Macbeth, the now headless and reviled tyrant had been an honoured war hero. Brave Macbeth, Duncan's valiant cousin, and a worthy gentleman. But as the play approached its end, Macbeth had become as Shakespeare puts it, hellhound, viscerally hated across the nation. And for all Macbeth's once grandiosely feared prominence, New King Malcolm summarily dismissed the Macbeths as this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen, who, as 'tis thought, by self and violent hands, took off her life. So Macbeth was brought down when potentially healthy ambition quickly turned septic, and he willfully suppressed his own conscious warnings to take what his wife called the nearest way and violently take the throne. Macbeth, therefore, as a practised deceiver, intoxicated by overweening pride, was ironically brought to perdition, loss of his soul and life, by acting on the double-meaninged chanting of the witches. So a ruthlessly violent deceiver, himself deceived and punished by the loss of his wife, infinite despair, and a shameful and violent death, concluded this grimly gripping and tragic tale of an ambition too far. So that is my reading from Descent into Darkness, and I hope it's given some inkling to what the book is all about.
What an incredibly intense and dark story, quite frankly.
It isn't for the faint-hearted, but it gives an inkling into human nature and the workings of power, which we see in the news every day at this time in our lives.
Yeah, quite sad to think that even though we've advanced so much technically, etc., as kind of human instincts and human ways have kind of not really evolved much at all, it seems.
Tyrants are still killing for the sake of their own sense of power, and they want to feel better about themselves.
Absolutely. It's a very sad state of affairs. But thank you so much. It's an amazing book, and I love the fact that you came straight in with the three witches.
Well, the witches. They're a good dramatic device, the witches.
Yeah.
It gets the audience straight into the atmosphere of the play.
Gave me goosebumps straight away. It was amazing. So, can you tell us where this book is available?
Yes. The book, here it is, Into Darkness, is available in bookshops, but also on Amazon, and available in hardback, in paperback, like that one, or indeed, and it's particularly good value. It's only $3.99 as a Kindle e-book. Good thing you can do is to get a copy of the paperback and the Kindle e-book, because the notes on the play, and they're extensive notes which explain what's going on and what all the words mean, are at the back. But if you're reading on the Kindle version, each of the notes is hypertexted, so you can just press on the number and you get straight there. So having both can be good. But either way, the aim is to unlock the play for you, so you can really understand it and enrich your life accordingly.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for coming on today's show. Thank you so much for sharing Descent into Darkness. An amazing read. Amazing read. And people at home, you've met Mr. D again. I suggest that you add this one to your collection as well. This is a must for any bookshelf. And so you'll find the links as to where the book is available on the introductory page of this episode as well. Please make sure you do that. Nicholas, thank you so much.
Very much indeed. I've really enjoyed being part of your podcast again.
Okay, hurry up then, please. More books, more shows. Get your skates on. Nicholas, thank you so much. We are definitely in contact, and I will definitely speak to you again soon.
All the best.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Well, I'm hoping you've already got Nicholas's book, The Regal Throne, already on order. So this is another definite must buy, okay, for your bookshelf or for your Kindle. Please make sure you do that before switching off today. Thank you so much, Mr. Dobson, for being a guest on the book read again. It's been wonderful to hear you speak about your book, Descent into Darkness. Please make sure, people at home, that you go and support Nicholas Dobson and his writing. Go and buy his book, either hardback, paperback, or Kindle, and go and check him out. That's wonderful. And I will be back again for another book read very, very soon. You take care. Stay beautiful. Bye bye.